All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the Top Tips for Moving to EFT for Payables webinar. My name is Brandon Cook. I'm going to be doing just a few really quick housekeeping notes before we get started here with Estelle and some of the EFT tips. So first off, we are using GoToWebinar today, as you can tell. And if you look on the right side of the screen, you see the questions tab. Feel free to drop any questions you have in that panel as we're going today. So we are going to be answering some questions as the webinar goes today, so no worries, just drop those in there and we'll get to them as we go. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on our Njevity resources page this afternoon. You can find all our recorded webinars there. You can also register for Wendy Epperson's Best Practices for RDP webinar tomorrow as well, starting at 11 Mountain Time, so don't miss that. So I'll go ahead and read our Njevity mission statement. Real quick, our mission statement is at the foundation of everything we do here at Njevity, and it's super important to us. So our mission is to improve the life and success of our partners and customers by providing exceptional business application experiences that simplify, inform, and delight. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenter for today, Ms. Estelle Varner.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Just confirm before you mute yourself. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you for that, Brandon. And just to tag on to what Brandon said about our mission statement, all of our webinars are designed to exemplify this mission statement is to inform your life with some functionality in GP and hopefully make life easier for you and your workday more enjoyable because it's easier. And with that in mind, this particular webinar is designed to hopefully help you start implementing electronic fund transfer for payables and make life easier for your AP people. Now, before I go into details on that, I do want to point out a couple things. First, we are going to be releasing another short webinar next week that will cover some aspects of sending checks to your vendors, so that may make sending checks easier. So even though we feel like electronic fund transfer is the most efficient and the best and easiest way to go about sending payments, that we know that there's times that you still have to send checks, or maybe just the way things work, you feel like, well, electronic fund transfer isn't for me. So we've got some ideas that might make just regular check sending a little easier. And the other thing before jumping in, I wanted to just ask a question of everybody. And this may be my last question, although you're certainly free to type in questions to me. But basically, I would like to know kind of what the proportion of people in attendance are. If you use Microsoft Dynamics GP, whether it's on-premise or hosted, I'm going to assume that most people are that type of client. But there are others that maybe use only the web client or Power GP Online. So, for example, if you're not sure which you are, you know, standard GP or hosted GP will look something like this. A web client or Power GP will look something like this. So if you wouldn't mind for me going into the chat or the questions and indicating for me if you are a web client. You can just say, yes, that's me, or yes, and I'll know that that is a yes to being web client type. And that will help guide what I share with you and what screens I use. Okay, so let me get back to my PowerPoint here a little bit. So our goal here today is to go over how to set up your EFT bank information, and then to how to set up your vendors for receiving EFTs, and then a quick little demo of what the process looks like of actually processing an EFT payment. And at the end, we should have some time for questions and answers, or if there's something that really comes to mind in the middle, feel free to input that, and Brandon will be on the lookout for any questions that we can pause for. All right, so let's first talk about setting up your EFT bank before we go into GP. Did we get, how are our answers to our questions? Do we have any Power GP people? We've got, I see one, nope, one, okay. Oh, we have a few. Okay, so I will definitely be sharing some screens for both types of GP. Okay, so first off, I feel like you need to understand that you will need help from your bank in setting up electronic fund transfer. You will likely need to get a specification sheet from your bank that tells you what fields they require where. Despite almost all banks in the U.S. are set up to receive a standard NACHA format, we've had the experience of seeing that some banks they're just a little different. The 90% of it might be matching exactly what the specs are that are in GP by default, but there may be some minor differences. So you'll want those spec sheets from them. And just to give you an example of what something like that would look like, this was a specification file that I got from Chase Bank for a particular client. And you'll likely get something that looks like this with their bank name, and if I scroll down, you're going to see pages that show, you know, where certain fields go where. So just be expecting to have to reach out to your bank and say, do you have a NACHA file spec sheet? Can you send that to me? Let's see. And then you may need to ask, do you require more than one format? Most banks will say, okay, get one standard format and we'll receive all your payments no matter who you're paying. Other banks may say, well, I want one type of format that is for paying individuals, maybe employee reimbursements and things like that, versus one format that is for sending payments to companies. So you need to know that information from your bank up front. Also plan on needing 1 to 3 small tests with the NACHA file when you first set it up. It's not something that you can just turn on and you're good to go. If you're lucky, 1 small test and everything will be good. Sometimes I feel like I've had better luck with the smaller banks that everything's good right away, but sometimes that requires more. And with that in mind, it might be helpful to do the testing of EFT setup in a test company if you have one. And that way you can put in some dummy transactions and payments for vendors and make those runs without worrying about having to back them out because you're in your live company. So with that information in mind, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into GP and show you some screens, and then I'll flip over to Power GP and show you similar screens. So for your company side of the setup, you need to go into your financial module, and then you're going into Checkbook. And there we go. And you're going to choose your account that you want to send EFT payments from. You'll want to be sure that you have bank account and bank ID information needed, because this will now be a field that will be pulled from for your file transfer. You'll click on EFT Bank, and by default, if you have never used it before, all of these fields will be blank. You'll probably have United States, but all of this information, this is where you're going to need that information from your bank. You probably know your transit routing number and your account number, but does your bank say, no, we do need the registration number, or no, we're going to use your account number? as the tax registration number. Each bank is a little different, so you'll want to get that information from your bank. I won't go into too much detail other than say you'll have to fill out these fields and get some guidance from your bank. Certainly you can reach out to Njevity. I'll say most clients ask for their partner's help with setting up EFT, and then once it's working, they're good to go on their own and they don't need any other assistance. But just to have you get a picture of your setup, you're going to then, after you get this information in here, you're going to go to your payables option, and you're going to fill in information like, are you going to use EFT numbers versus check numbers? I would recommend EFT numbers. Are you going to use a single format, or does your bank require separate formats? And if that was the case, you'd say, okay, for businesses, they're going to use a file that you create and you give it a name, or you're going to use the personal file. So that might look like something like for my personal, I would put in, okay, they're going to get paid using that AP NACHA file, and my corporate is going to get using the test. Of course, you'd name it something different. But I will say that 90% of customers, I think I mentioned that before, usually only require a single format. So I'm going to go back to that. And you'll come up with your own name for this. So you may, you know, call it whatever you want. But I typed in AP, and then it asked me, do I want to add this format? I said yes. And it takes me to this NACHA file. Now, this is the reason why you hope 90% of or more of that spec sheet your bank sent you is right on with what GP has. And all of that spec file is going to tell you what should be in the headers, batch headers, details, all of that. So we're going to expect that most of this is just right, but just to let you know, if you do need assistance from us or another partner, these fields can be tweaked, modified, and all if necessary. And so just be aware that it can be adjusted if you need to. On this particular location, you're going to indicate where the file should go. So these EFT file payments do not upload directly to your bank. What they do is they create a file that you save, and then from there, with your bank's guidance, they'll say, okay, we want you to upload that file to this particular location on our website, and you take it from there. So what we're just worrying about on the GB side is creating that file for you. So we will do that. Before I close, I'll mention pre-notes. Less and less banks are requiring pre-notes, but just so that you understand the idea, pre-notes would be a way for you to run an EFT payment as a test where there's no dollar amount. So as soon as you set up a vendor, you've assigned their bank information and all of that, and you've said, yes, I want to send them as EFT payments, but you've never sent an EFT payment to them. So you want the bank to confirm that, yes, you have the right account number, routing number, and all that. A pre-note pushes through new vendors you've added as a blank dollar amount for your bank to check. Some banks don't like that, and they don't want that. So that's another reason why you have to speak to your bank and say, do you require it? Do you say you don't want it, or are they okay? And the reason why there's a checkbox here is if you do turn it on, then some banks will say, well, try it once. Do a pre-note once for your vendors. Or some banks will say you've got to get an approval at least twice before we will accept real payment. So that's the type of information you need to know for setting up your banking information. So I'm going to close this screen, and close this, and then just quickly kind of shift over to PowerGP and go into financial to show you. I'm not going to go into details, but to show you just really, it's basically the same thing. You're going into financial, checkbook. You're going to choose your checkbook. You're going to fill in your banking information. You're going to click on EFT Bank. Fill in your information down here. And let me scroll down. Click on Payables options. So even the navigation is very similar in PowerGP Online. I've got my single format. All of this is the same whether you're in Web Client and GP. So I wanted to make everyone feel confident that no matter what version, you can do the setup. So I will close that. And let's switch a little bit back on my presentation. And here I've got a picture of the NACHA files just to give you an idea of what those spec files tell you about all of these different fields. So moving from setting up your banking information, then you have to deal with setting up your vendor's information. So first off, you need to be able to do that, you have to gather all that information. So you may want to have a document where you can send out to your vendors asking them for their information if you don't already have it. And I believe, I'm not sure if Brendan got it done, but I believe I have an attachment on this webinar that you can download. It's a Word document. What I did in Great Plains, I used the write letters feature from the vendor, and let me bring it over. And I created a sample letter where you could kind of fill in, okay, your information. It's just a standard letter where you could fill in what you're asking for. But what's really nice about it is they have this authorization agreement for direct deposits, asking for the information that you're going to need from your vendors. The depository name, their branch, the city, the routing number, and I tacked on also an email address because you are likely going to want to email them the remittance that comes from printing EFT payments. And that way you don't have to individually notify your vendors when payments have been made. GP can handle sending the emails. So if you want this as an example of a letter for gathering your information from your vendors, we can have that available to you if it's not already on this webinar. So think about gathering that information. To be honest with you, the process of setting up EFTs is a few weeks period, and and one of the main reasons of that is because you've got to gather that information from your vendors. And you know, you may send out an email and think that you could get an answer right away, but you know, sometimes you're lucky to get that response that you need timely, as well as getting timely responses from your bank. So that's just the reality of things, but we can certainly hope to push it along as quickly as possible. We want to be sure to add the EFT information to your vendor's remit-to address. So looking at this let me go into the web client version. So if I go into purchasing and click on vendors, come on, shouldn't have clicked twice, I guess. And let's choose a vendor here. So what you notice that for your vendors, by default, you have an address that you fill in here. And a lot of times people will use the address ID of primary. Maybe they use main. Maybe you prefer to use a street ID or something. But whatever your primary address is, when you first set up a vendor, you notice that it automatically fills in your purchase address ID, your remit to, and your ship from to be that same address ID. And for most vendors, the remit to address is the same address as their primary one. But occasionally you may have a vendor that the remit to is maybe a post office box where your ship to or your other address you indicate is a different address. So what my point is you want to be sure to send set up the EFT information for the remit to address. If it is unique, you want to be sure to choose that unique address. So on here, I'm going to click on the Addresses tab, and because primary is the same as the remit to address, I'm safe to continue to add the EFT information to this address ID. So I'm going to click on EFT Payments. And you can see for this particular vendor, I already have information set up. I chose United States as the bank. I put in the bank, routing number, and I left it as non-specified because the setup on here was not unique for a person versus a corporation. It was just everybody can get the same AP NACHA file. And also I left it as non-specified. All right. And so that letter that you send out or request, you're going to be able to fill out this screen for them. You'll also, your email, you'll want to be sure your email address is attached to the primary or the remit to address ID. So you're going to fill in your information right here. And I just realized I don't have emailing set up in PowerGP, so I'm not going to do that or it'll give me an error. I can flip over to Dynamics GP, the standard version, and go to Vendor. And instead of having a tab along the top, I'm going to click on the address. Remit to address here is the same as here, so I'm safe to add the EFT information here, which I have already done for this particular vendor. And I would click on the button, the World button, and I've got my email address here. Now, there are other aspects of setting up emailing, and I'm not going to go into the detail on that. I consider sending EFT payments and getting your emailing kind of that they go hand in hand. It's great that you can do EFTs, but I would feel like you're still got a lot of work if you didn't have the emailing functionality added to that. Without the emailing, you would have to manually notify your vendors that you've sent a payment. So we want to have both of those parts, and we will be having another webinar in a couple weeks covering how to set up emailing and some of the various functionalities that emailing covers. So I'm just mentioning that we'll cover a little bit more there. Just keep it in mind that really should be considered kind of a step for processing your EFT payments. So I know I kind of rushed through that because we still want time to actually show you what an EFT payment process looks like. But I'd like to pause now and see, does anyone have any questions of what we've covered so far?
Don't know if this was a question or a comment, but someone did say one place to start if you're doing reimbursement for internal employees, start with them first.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood. Is this a suggestion or was this a question?
I think it was a suggestion.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's a good idea, that if you are starting with setting up EFTs, a good way to start is with reimbursements to internal employees and all. It's easier to get the information. You may already have it if you use payroll, and also it's just easier for testing.
And we also have another question, a question saying, can a vendor be set up with multiple EFT accounts, i.e. payments routed to different banks?
I haven't been asked that, but I would. It would be tricky, I think. I mean, you can since you can have multiple addresses, you could have different EFT information attached to different addresses, but then you would have to be careful when you are, before you go to pay them, that you have assigned the right address as the remit-to address. And I'm not sure if you can do that on the fly as you're choosing who you're paying. We can take a quick look at that and see if that is a possibility, if we can adjust what address when you're paying them. And if you can, then that would be a way to have multiple EFT places to send your payments for your vendors. All right, that's a good question. So this was the sample letter that I mentioned that I have. Let's see. So let's start with actually running an EFT payment. So I'm going to do this mostly in GP, but I'll show a few screens in Power GP as well. So to run an EFT payment process, it is very similar to running a regular check batch. So just as you normally would, you would go into your batches and you would create a batch. Let's call it, EFT Pay. All right, and I'm going to choose Computer Check. Notice when I click on Computer Check, this area right here that had not even been available is now open. And most of the time now without EFT, you just kind of ignore it and just go on and make sure your dates are right, your checkbook is right, and create your batch. But here you want to stop and say, yes, this is an EFT batch. So you're going to choose that specifically. And I'm going to say all of this information is okay. I'm going to click on Transactions. Now, I could show you the process and build and edit vendor payment. I'm going to just start with edit payment batch because I think it's a little easier. And most people, I believe, use this method now to choose who they're going to pay and how much. So now, in my setup for this demo, just to explain a few things, I just went into the first, I don't know, 6 or 7 vendors in my sample company. And so they all start with the letter A. And some of them I made a point of setting up as EFT vendors, and some of them I didn't, because I wanted you to see what happens when you're trying to pay vendors in an EFT batch. So we know, based on just my showing you ACE Travel, that they are set up with EFT information. So I can, and since I'm on ACE Travel right now, I will just select this first one and let's say this second one here. I'll do this one as one to pay. Then if I click on Allentown, let's see, it is letting me choose them. Now, they are on my list of ones that I had set up for an EFT vendor. Let's see what happens when I choose American, because I know I did not set American up as an EFT vendor. So if I click on them, I get a pop-up telling me that my remit-to address, some of my remit-to address is missing or inactive, and that is because this is an EFT batch. I don't have EFT information assigned to them, and GP sees that and says, no, you can't pay them in an EFT batch. So you do have to keep your EFT payment batches separate from your regular check batches. But it's good news too, because that means if you do like to use the build batch, even if you build a batch that's from letter A to Z, then you know an EFT batch will not include any payments for vendors that aren't set up as EFTs. It will automatically reject those as possible ones to pay, and all because they aren't set up. You know, my preference still is to be able to visually, you know, hand choose and see why aren't they included. Oh, they're not included because there's some information missing. But let's say, okay, we know this, we're good. These were the only two vendors we wanted to pay. So I'm going to go ahead with the process, and I am going, oh, first off, I wanted to see, I'm going to look at Allentown. I'm going to make sure we're on Allentown, and I'm going to click on Edit Vendor Payments. And I am not seeing on this screen where I could change the remittance address. I would need to do a little testing to see if I drilled down and changed the remit-to address at this particular point in time and said, okay, I want this remit-to address because it has a different EFT bank. Would that be too late for it to be included with the with this EFT run? So let me get back. Whoever asked that question, I'll do a little testing and we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, we also have another
All
comment
right,
from Wendy. Said you would need to select the proper remit address when you enter the invoice. I don't know if that's already covered in that, but it's the same name on that as well.
okay, I didn't hear you very clearly. You have to select the proper remit-to address, but is the timing before or during or?
When you enter the invoice. So.
When you enter the invoice. Oh, yes, yes. Okay, that makes sense. So I'm going to reduce this down. So if you know at the time that you're entering in the invoice, notice when you enter an invoice, let's just accept all of this information. I choose ACE. Notice it fills in my remit-to address right here. So if at the time I'm entering, I say that the remit-to address for this invoice is a particular address ID, then we're controlling what address, so what EFT information it's going to use. Thank you. Good point, Wendy. All right, so let's go back to this process here. We've got our batch. We've selected our information of our list of vendors that we want to pay, so we want to process this batch. So I'm going to click on Process and see that it comes up to our typical screen of printing payments. However, a few things are different. Our check number is grayed out. Our check information down here of what format, that's all grayed out. You can't use checks. We do have our separate remittance box checked, and we want that to be checked. And we can adjust our date if we need to, our posting date, but everything looks good to me, so I'm going to click on process. All right. So now when we process EFT payments, I'm sorry, was that a question? No. All right. So when we process EFT payments, it takes us to this remittance form where we have an opportunity to print it. It will always default to the alignment form once you get it all set up. If you the alignment form, the remittance form is fine as it is, but if you do make any modifications, you may need to initially make sure the alignment form is, or the alignment is correct. Once that's done, you're always going to skip past that and go to remittance form. Notice when I click on remittance form, I've got a couple fields that are active. I can print this document if I just want to see it on paper and save it, or do I want to email the vendors with notification of the remittance? I want to do that because I know I have emailing set up for it, so I'm going to click on this send document and email, and I'm going to process. Now, before I do, I want to point out that if I had the thought is, oh, I'll do that later, first let me get posted because I want to get to my generate the EFT, and I'll do the remittance later. No, you can't do that. Your only time, your only opportunity to print your remittance form is now before you post. You could say, well, I'm not ready yet. I want to go to lunch, something. You could click on process later. And then when you get back from lunch, you say, okay, now I need to finish my batch. Click on process remittance. Pull up your EFT batch. Get back to where you were at. But do not post first or you've lost your chance for these remittances. So let me process the remittance form, and I'm going to print it to screen. Let me put in my password. Okay, and I'm going to print this to screen, and I'll show you this exception report. Right. We've got coming. Here we go. So I have my own logo I made up here, but you can see the check remittance with the information of what's been paid that you can get. And if you want to save it, if that's your policy, you can save it. Now, in addition to printing it, I also said send it in an email. So let me reduce this down and check my inbox. And my inbox is on my other screen. So let me bring that in and click on here. And you can see that I've got now I could set up my message to say whatever I want. In this particular case, I have this very generic message, and I have my PDF attachment. If I open this up, you can see that this is what the vendor sees. And, oh, this is Allentown. And close this tab. I'll close all of these tabs. And I'm sure this one was the one that was for ACE. So because in my setup, I had it sending to myself, you would obviously see these in your outbox as remittances that you've sent, but your vendor, this is what they will see. If I check my outbox, my sent box, here's my ones. This is what you would expect to see, what's in your sent box. All right. Let's get this out of the way. And this exception report, it's good to print to screen. It tells you that the document's sent successfully. So the exception report deals with the emailing side of things. So for example, if you had set up these vendors, if one of these vendors, maybe I had all set up for EFT payments, but I hadn't put in their email address, then I would get a notice that on here that there was a failure, that it could not be sent to that particular vendor because the email is missing. If you've got the email just set up wrong, or the email address does not exist, or you know, you have a comma instead of colon, or something like that, but dividing the people you're sending it to, then you'll get a notice on this report telling you there's a problem, and hopefully enough information for you to know how to fix it so that next time it'll work correctly. All right. So now that we have printed our remittance form, we've sent it through email, and everything went well, I'm going to go ahead and post this. So basically, other than printing the remittance form instead of printing a check, you're not seeing much different in the process. So where's the file? That's our next step. So let's just take a look at these reports, and then we'll take a look at the main new step that is added for EFT payments. And should have just canceled these reports. Just keep in mind with the EFT emailing, here's my EFT payment register. So that's a new report that you don't get with regular check printing. But keep in mind, if you're going to do a batch that has a couple payments, you saw that it went into my email. I received them pretty quickly. If you're going to do a batch that has 500, I'm not sure I'd even recommend that, but if say you're doing a batch of 100 and all of them are receiving emails, then don't expect for all of that emailing to get accomplished in under a couple minutes. It's going to take a little bit. It'll get done. It just may take over the course of a number of minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes for those emails to go out. All right. So we've done it. We've processed. We post. Now, if we go to our Generate EFT file and we select the correct checkbook, notice we now have a batch here. If I hadn't processed a batch, and even if I chose that checkbook, this would be empty. So once I double check that my transmission date and settlement date is right, all I need to do is check this and say generate the EFT file. You'll get a notice that a file has been generated, tells you how many transactions are in the file and where it is. Now I've got this saved on my desktop. So let's take a look at my desktop. Got a number of things here. Close that, and take a look at this EFT payment. So now this is what the bank is looking for. They're looking for, our first line is our header. We've got a batch header. We've got the detail. Here's our payment for Ace Travel, our payment for Allentown, and then the footer information with totals. So that's the file that your bank is looking for, and will give you directions of where to upload that file to. It's in the exact format that they need. Just as a quick review in the Power GP setup. Very similar. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but if we choose batches, notice and do an EFT pay or P, and I choose computer checks, you see we have an EFT. And we go through the same exact process, the same screens of selecting who we want to pay, processing the payment that sends it to the process remittance, where you can email and print the remittance, then you can post. And when that process is all done, just like in the standard GP, we've got a generate EFT file that once we choose our checkbook, we can select our batch and send. And so, any new questions?
Nothing right now, Estelle.
Okay. All right. I believe we're also going to have attached to this webinar, or if anybody wants this and it's not attached, I can give you this slide deck. Maybe some of the pictures on here will be good reminders for you. I've got, screenshots. I've got a little bit of the description of what the settlement date and transmission date is. But that is our coverage of EFT payments. Just a reminder that next week we'll release a little webinar that covers maybe some ways to make printing checks easier, or just more convenient from having to do them from home maybe. I know we have had some situations where we've heard of clients where they have to go into the office just to print checks, or they're trying to print them remotely, and depending on somebody in the office going to check if they're on the printer and if they printed correctly or not. So we're hoping that some of the tips next week, if you're still printing checks, may alleviate some of those problems, or give you some ideas of ways to change it up. So unless you have any questions, we will wind this down. We are recording this so that we will get it in good shape and posted, and let you know where that is so that you can get to it and review the webinar. If you have any one-on-one type of questions you want to follow up with, feel free to reach out to support@njevity.com, and we will be happy to help give you some suggestions on how to get information from your bank and how to use that information that you get in setting up your information. So no new questions, so I'm going to just say thank you for attending. I hope this is helpful and helps you move towards setting up electronic fund transfer, especially in this day where we're having to find better ways, more efficient ways, and all that. We'll just hope we've given you that information to do that. Thank you for your attendance, and have a good day.